Okay, we'll do roll call. Peggy Briggs,
Present.
Brian Conway,
Present.
Eric Dahlberg,
Here.
Gerard Jansen,
Present.
and welcome, Gerard.
Thank you.
Don Kupka,
Here.
Lindsay Liss, Carlin Reed, here. Paul Rodriguez,
Here.
Ozzy Sedruzaman, Lois Wassoff. We have a quorum.
We figured out the problem. Can we turn off the sound from the screen behind us? All right, is this better now? Yes, I think it is. Can you guys hear us?
Yeah, that's way better.
Okay.
That's good.
All right. We call to order. We're going to welcome our newest member, Gerard Jansen, and re-welcome Brian Conway, our second newest member. He now has seniority because Gerard came on one meeting later. We are going to move to public comment. As usual, public comment is limited to 10 minutes, no more than 2 minutes per speaker, and it's limited to items not on the agenda. Does anyone want to offer any public comment at this time? I'm seeing no raised hands, so we'll move on. Reviewing correspondence, if any, and the answer is there is none. So we can move past correspondence. Did you see any raised hands?
Yeah, that's.
Ryan?
I think he can see.
Yeah, you're right. I can't see them. Okay.
I would just point out that when
The
Lindsay.
next item on the agenda
Excuse me,
is,
Lois, you have the only microphone. So when Lindsay speaks to you, we cannot hear Lindsay. So anyone else at the table, we can't hear.
Peggy, we can't hear you in the room, so we're going to have to turn this on and stop talking.
Oh,
Can you try?
sure. Lois, you have the microphone and you were speaking to Lindsay. Unless she is speaking in the microphone, no one else can hear. So
We
the
have
four
to
of
pass
you in
back.
the room have to pass the microphone in order to be heard.
Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah, no problem.
So the next item on the agenda is approving the minutes of June 26, 2023 that are in the packet. Does anyone have any comments, amendments, or changes to the minutes?
I did receive one comment from Kathy, and I'll make that correction. It was the correction to the title of her committee to which she's a liaison. I'll make that amendment.
Are there any other comments, corrections, amendments to the minutes? Okay. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Don has moved.
I second.
All right. Carlin, can you do the roll call vote?
Okay, this is a roll call vote to approve the minutes of June 26, 2025 as amended. Suresh Bhatia. I'll come back to Suresh. Peggy Briggs,
Aye.
approve the minutes as amended? Say aye. Sorry, Brian, I did not.
Oh, aye, sorry.
Approve the minutes as amended for Eric.
Yes.
Jansen. You approve the minutes?
I wasn't there, so I can't approve them.
Are you abstaining?
I'm just recently joined, so I wasn't at the meeting, so I shouldn't have a vote in this.
Okay, you can abstain if you
I
wish.
abstain. Yeah, I'll abstain.
Lindsay Liss. Lynn Reed, yes. Paul Rodriguez.
Yes.
Is not here. Shree's not here. Lois Wassoff. Suresh Bhatia.
I will abstain. I was not present.
Six, seven, eight. 8 yes, 2 abstention. Motion passes.
So the next item on the agenda is the liaison reports. I included in the packet the ones that I had received in writing in advance, and I also included the summary that was based on the minutes that Carlin and I both took at the chair's breakfast. Does anyone have any additional liaison reports or any questions about the reports that were in the packet? I see no raised hands. So we will move on. See, we're going to make up the lost time. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the proposed meeting schedule through May of 2026. You all have that one pager in the document. Just as a little bit of background, the select board set the date for town meeting. It begins on April 27th, and that let us firm up a schedule for our activities because so much of what we do backs off of town meeting and the dates that are determined by town meeting. So I hope everyone's had a chance to look at this. If you have any problems with any of the dates, let me know. There's a question that I'd like to ask, which is, do we, and in the February meeting, the date that I had originally designated, it was February 19th. It's during school vacation week. Does that create a problem for people? Should we move that to February 26th?
I would prefer to move
But
it to
feel
February
strongly about it one
26th.
way or another. I can make a. Here, Lindsay's comment was she would prefer it to be moved, if it doesn't back up against, it doesn't push us up against the public hearings. I don't think so. Here, Lindsay, let's share that. Right.
Yeah, just what Lois said. I prefer it to be moved, just because that is during the break week, and if it's not a big deal to move it to the following week, that would be the preference, or the week before.
Even to the 26th, if you're willing to chair, because I can't be physically there that day.
Yes.
So, all right, so that. The 20th.
Paul also has his hand up.
Paul,
I too would like to shift it outside of that week if possible.
okay. So let's say it will be February 26th. It won't be during that week, and we can look at it offline, not take everybody's time up with it now, and probably move it to the 26th. And that gives us the ability to add an extra meeting in February if we're backed up on something or if we need the extra time. So. Just want to emphasize the deadlines that we're working against and also the fact that March will be hell. The deadline for our recommendations on warrant articles, and last year FinCom had to make recommendations on 36 of the warrant articles, so that was 2/3, well, 3/4 of the full warrant, is March 23rd. So that's one of the reasons that the March meetings are set up the way they are. Last year, the last hearing was the day before we had to finalize our recommendations. My hope is that by having those 3 meetings spaced the way they are in March, and then having some time afterward to finalize our recommendations, we have time to consider things, to have a full conversation at a meeting dedicated to that when we're all awake instead of doing it at 11 o'clock at night. My hope is also that we'll have some breathing room. So in case something needs to be rescheduled, we'll be able to do that. So that's the reason it's done that way. But those of you who have been on the committee before know, and for Brian and Gerard, trust me on this, those are important dates in your calendar. They're important meetings to attend. This is our job, is to provide the public with an opportunity to present comments on these warrant articles, to listen to what's said, to ask questions, and to ultimately come up with thoughtful recommendations for town meeting. So beware the Ides of March. That's Dakota right there. Yeah. Going to go backwards a little bit again because we're going to pick this up later in the meeting. We have other important deadlines related to the guidelines that we set. And again, none of these dates could be set until we knew when town meeting was. So our deadline for the final guideline is December 19th. It's tied to the date that the warrant closes. It's 5 weeks before the date that the warrant closes. So I've highlighted the date the warrant opens and the date the warrant closes and made a note of that deadline for our final guidelines. We're going to talk tonight later in the agenda about timing on the setting the preliminary guidelines, but I just wanted to highlight that for everyone. So does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, then these dates will be coming to you in the form of calendar invitations with Zoom links, I hope. I know the finance department. These dates will appear in your calendar and will come to haunt you. So. And I guess the next item up, and I'll invite Wendy Ravelli, our select board liaison, who's here to comment on this. And I'll just give a little background. We've talked at the last meeting about our desire, and we voted to ask the select board to create a mechanism for us to work jointly with the select board on setting policies related to financial issues with a particular focus on reserves, since that had been an issue that came up at town meeting and was something that the select board wanted us to work with them to address. Wendy and I had conversations about this and checked with the town clerk. And the select board has already reviewed the draft charge that is in your materials. The select board hasn't approved this draft yet, but they have reviewed it. The financial policy work group will be a public body, which means meetings will be noticed, the public will be able to attend and ask questions. It will be comprised of one designated member from the select board, two from our group. We will be supported by the finance department. We're looking forward to Ryan's help on this, and other resources as we need them. So I wanted all of you to be aware of the status of this, and if anyone has any comments or concerns or questions about this draft charge to the Financial Policy Work Group, please raise them now or raise them later if you want to reach out to me or Wendy, but I prefer that we talk about it now, and I want Wendy to be able to give our feedback to the full select board, because the hope is that this will be voted on and formally approved by the select board at its next meeting, and we'll be able to get to work very shortly after that. And the only other thing I would note is that this has some specific dates and deliverables associated with it. An interim report that will be, we'd be trying to complete a status report that we'd be trying to complete around the time the warrant opens. And the idea is to give guidance to the people who are preparing and thinking about warrant articles that might address some of these issues, to give them an idea of what our thinking and our learning has been to that point. And then a full report, the date we picked was February, the end of February. And that was partly because the Finance Committee is not going to have time to work on this in March anyway, so we might as well get it done in February. So keep that in mind if you want to volunteer and participate in this group. And Wendy, is there anything I left out? Anything you want to add?
Hopefully I'm not echoing. The only thing I just want to add was at the select board meeting, there were two comments. One was I'm going to was asked to put a little more preamble to the background, really speaking to the importance of our financial policies as it relates to, Concord's financial status and our bond rating, et cetera. The other request was in the list of reference information that was listed, there was a discussion to make sure that we identify our town financial advisor, because, and that's the individual we go to when we look to bond, when we're going to have a bond issuance. So I think that's important. So those are the only real changes to this. But other than that, I think the select board was in support of this.
Wendy, I think you're the proper person. This is a procedural question. Normally, FinCom members are not on any other town committee. This appears to be a town committee. Why are we allowed to have FinCom members who are voting members on this second town committee? I think I know one answer, but I want to hear what you folks know about.
So I think it's kind of like other committees where we require representation from other committees, sort of like the Workland Group, et cetera. So it might be worth actually noting in here that the FinCom members that participate are exempt from our dual committee policy. That typically that's not allowed. I think that's a good thing to identify.
Is
That it's a subcommittee.
It's not, it's listed as just a policy work group. It doesn't say it's a subcommittee of the Finance Committee.
There's
It's
another-
sort of a standing committee.
another aspect that I think maybe it may apply is I don't know that the FinCom is covered under APP 10. It's not listed under that. We talk
All
about
committees should be.
procedures, but because we're appointed by the town moderator, not the select board.
Mhm. I think it applies. I think it's all town committees.
I'm sure that the two members will follow.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
process.
I'm sure, yeah. Yep.
This is an unusual circumstance, and I want to make sure that we've got the process. Otherwise, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And then Eric, you'll be up as soon as Don is done.
I wanted to,
There was some document that was sent to the select board in April last year that was not distributed. I don't know if that's the same document or not. I believe it probably is, yes.
So I think that.
Were the people online able to hear Don?
No,
Not at all.
yeah.
I wanted to fill in the gap here for those who were members last year and part of the process of creating a proposed reserve policy. And then we went twice to the select board to discuss it. That policy was not distributed to the select board, and that's why it felt like a disconnect when we appeared there. They had not seen it. So this working group hopefully will start from scratch, and we'll get past that obstacle this time. Thanks.
Eric Dahlberg, you had a comment?
Yes, I just the write-up looks great. It's very thoughtful and comprehensive. One thing I noticed that's missing, and this may be intentional, is an end date, a date on which the work group will presumably conclude. It's implied that its work will wrap up when the recommendations are submitted to the select board in February of 2026, but it's not explicit.
I don't know if it's deliberate necessarily. I mean, we can make it more explicit. I think we should see how this goes because if we, so what the other thing I'll comment on is that, and I mentioned this to Lois, is that our intention is not to rewrite the financial policies document that is the finance department, but that when this committee first forms and you hear, you know, the focus originally is the reserve policies, but we want to make sure that any policy that this group feels is strategic that could be reviewed ought to be within our scope. So I think the intention of the report was on the stabilization funds, but I think we want to reserve the right that there may be other policies that we want to address and that might extend it. So it's a good point, Eric, but I think it's sort of deliberately not quoted as an end date. So when when nominations are made, it'll be a little bit like the land policy work group where it says the term date is when when the committee concludes its work, as vague as that is. But the intention is that we'll try to wrap up by the end of February.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're going to learn a lot through reviewing the materials that are designated and other things that we discover. And I think we need the room to follow where that leads us without losing sight that our focus is to make sure that we've looked at the policies on reserves, that there is an understanding about how reserves are created, how the amount of money that's put into them, some criteria for that, what the factors are involved in releasing them. All of those things are important, and they're important to have a handle on before the next town meeting. So that's going to be our emphasis. But this is going to take us in directions that we can't necessarily predict. And I totally agree. I don't want to have a hard end date. But we may find that everything's perfect except the reserve funds and we can just go home.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So anyone else with questions or comments about this? My initial thought about the finance committee representatives for this group were that they would probably be me and Don Kupka, who's done the most work on this. If anyone else wants to participate, we can rethink that, or I can step back. So if anyone really would like to participate in this group, reach out to me and we'll figure out what to do. But that I just wanted to share with you that that was my original idea about how we would do this.
Yeah, and just to talk about the process, because, you know, the select board first nominates in 1 week and then is appointed at the next meeting. So, and I've asked this question, I don't know if we can do it, but if the FinCom has agreement on who you want to have nominated, if we'll present this next week, ideally, it would be good to make nominations next week.
Yeah.
At the select board, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So if
I
you
know, I
know who it
understand.
is, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that's a framework we can work with.
Okay,
We can
great.
make that decision. So I don't
You
think
can just
that's
let me
not
know.
something that the group needs to vote on. It's something that, you know, I think I can decide.
Yeah, your choice.
But I want to decide with input from people who are interested in it. So anything else on this, or should we move to the next item? I'm still going to try and make this a relatively short meeting. The next item on the agenda is really, as it is stated on the agenda, it's informational. This isn't intended to require any action on our part. It's to explain, it's to share some learning that that is some information that I learned about based on questions that I had gotten more informally about what the Finance Committee's role is in the tax rate setting process. What do we do? I spoke to Ryan about it and got some education, and I wanted to share that with you. The slides that are in the materials are for information only. They are the slides that were presented last November to the select board when the select board set the rates with input from the assessors. So, and I'm going to ask Ryan to jump in if I misstate something or distort something. Focusing on what the Finance Committee's role is in this, both by best practice and by law. We don't have a direct role in setting the tax rate, but we have an important job to do that informs this process, because the tax rate is set based on the amount of revenue that needs to be raised. The amount of revenue that needs to be raised is determined by the budgets that are approved at town meeting. And those budgets get approved at town meeting based on recommendations that we make to town meeting, and going backwards even further, based on the work that we do with the budgeting entities to understand needs, understand the larger context, and to set guidelines that we ask the budgeting entities to comply with. So we have an important role because we help shape the budget. We help determine how much we help town meeting determine how much the town is going to spend and the schools are going to spend. So that's our contribution to this process. It isn't a direct contribution at the meeting at which this is set. Any of us, the select board meeting at which the rates are set, any of us who attend are attending as interested citizens, as members of the public. But I thought it would be helpful and interesting for the members of the Finance Committee to have an opportunity to see what happens after our job for the relevant fiscal year has finished, and to understand that we are an important part of the process. We just are involved at an earlier stage. So Ryan, do you want to correct anything I just said? So does anybody else have any questions about this? I don't see any raised hands. Lindsay does.
Just, I think this is really helpful. It's not something I had time to kind of dig into before this meeting. If we do have questions, if anyone does have questions about the content here, who should we reach out to?
Reaching out to me, and I can share the materials with Ryan. I don't think you can, simplest way to do it. If it's a question I can answer, I will. There's a strong likelihood if it's a question that digs into the details, I'll end up referring it to Ryan, but let's start with me in the first instance. Any other comments, thoughts, questions about this?
That's on. Okay. Okay, all right. Can you hear me? Is the mic on? Yeah, okay, you can hear me. Okay. So, so one other thing too, in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of when that vote is taking place in November, and we've set this date as part of our calendar on the finance side, it's really also talking about really how do you want to break that up? So, it's a question of do you do, there's questions of the split tax rate of do you want to bring a commercial rate and a residential rate or just a residential rate? So open space discount, the granting of the residential exemption, which the town has now embraced, and granting a small commercial exemption or not. So those are specific questions as allowed by law. So it's just to note that again, as you had stated, Lois, really the role of the Finance Committee in this is really at the beginning of the process and establishing the foundational element of what has to be funded. So the rate is, essentially what we have to raise is a set number based upon the budget, but how that's broken up is the question for the select board. So, and with these 4
Including
questions.
questions about whether the money is going to be raised by having different rates for, just an easy example,
That's-
different rates for commercial properties and for residential.
That's right.
properties.
That's
That's
right.
not strictly within our purview. Our
That's right.
purview is to help the budgeting entities develop budgets that define the spending and then make our recommendations to town meeting.
Right.
There is a working group, the Tax Relief Evaluation Working Group, that is examining the residential tax exemption and other possible solutions towards tax relief. And I believe they're required to report back to the select board before this November hearing. Oh, thank you. And we heard from Wendy Ravello. We've got an October 6th preliminary report. So that may give us an idea of recommendations that may fall outside of the RTE that may have a budget impact. There's one possibility that they're talking about now, and this is one of the 2 committees that I'm reporting on. So you'll see that in my liaison report.
Thank you, Carlin. Anything else on this that anyone wants to talk about? And yeah, and Wendy is pointing out that we weigh in on all warrant articles that have a financial implication, not just the budget articles. We don't forget that as we're working through it. But our purview is broader than just approving the budget. So that's an important point to make. In terms of the rate setting, our specific responsibility is looking at overall spending and helping to develop the number that the assessors and the select board then have to figure out a way to cover. But it's absolutely true that we have a broader remit than just the budget. So, okay, anything else on this? Because if we don't have anything else on this, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to give the mic to Don, who is our guidelines chair this year, because the next 2 major items on the agenda, the guidelines and metrics and the information request letters that are going to go to the budgeting entities, both fall really within Don's area of responsibility this year of working with developing guidelines and metrics. And we talked briefly about what our deadlines are on those. We're working back off of a December 19th deadline for the final guidelines, but there's a lot that we do between now and then. So Don, do you want this mic?
Yeah. Yeah, so there are some slides for the for this meeting in the packet. However, the version that I'm about to show you will be slightly newer. And Ryan, am I sharing my screen? It looks like I'm sharing the packet, and I'd like to. Okay, here. Never mind. I figured it out. That one. Yeah, I'll share that. Boom. All right. And then do that. I won't do the full screen. Oh, there we go. What do you know? Okay. All right. So with a lot of credit to Lindsay Liss for putting together this packet last year, here's the update for this year. Paul, you're paying attention? Yeah, okay. You're going to be chair next year, so okay. So I wanted to begin just by just reminding everybody the 5 trends that we highlighted in our Finance Committee report last year, and say we should keep these in mind as we are developing our metrics for the guidelines, so that we can see if there are ways to improve the guidelines process that can help us with these trends. Trend 1, the rate of spending growth accelerated. I would say that was highlighting that growth from over the last decade grew from about 3.2% to 5%. For fiscal year 26, our growth is a little over 5. It's 5.14% in spending. 2, it was property taxes grew faster than spending over that time period. That's because our spending was growing faster than non-property tax revenue, and the balance has to be made up in property taxes. Trend 3, approaching Prop 2.5 limits. Our headway to continue raising taxes is without an override is getting smaller each year. Item 4, debt rising to a new high. We had about 120 million, a little more than that, of outstanding debt last year. Now with the newly approved debt at town meeting, plus the remaining debt to be issued for the middle school, we will be around $160 million, which is a massive increase compared to Concord's history. And trend number 5 is school budget growth. The overall growth of the school budgets has been lower than inflation, in fact, but enrollment is down. So the cost per pupil is up. And that's best illustrated by the fact that this year, the current fiscal year, our cost per pupil at the high school is up by 10% over last year. Now I will move on to slide 3, I hope. Yes. So slide 3. This is a repeat for anybody who's been a member before, but we have a couple of new members, so pay close attention. I'm going to start with that box over on the right side. It's the timeline. This meeting and our next meeting in August, we are about the metrics for what are the appropriate metrics for setting guidelines. Then after that, we will be receiving input from the towns and the schools. That comes in the form of answers to letters that we're sending out, which are part of this packet, and I'd like your feedback tonight on those, as well as the first look from the town and the schools at their budgets. And we want to wait until we've heard all that they have to say before we determine preliminary guidelines. So that deadline is in October. And then the final guidelines in December. So what are guidelines? Well, they are an annual obligation of the Finance Committee, and we do them together collaboratively with the town and the schools. And they are basically the percentage increase in spending that is subject to guidelines. That means if it is out of the control of the town, then it's not really subject to guidelines. So for that, a good example of that would be the cost of health insurance. Not much the town can do about that. So each year at this point, at least about 75% of our total spending is subject to guidelines and the rest is not. The guidelines are a balance of the inflationary impact on the cost of providing a level service to the constituents, and the taxpayer's ability to pay. So a lot of our metrics, the inputs that we use in determining them, try to capture the inflationary impact and the growth in current income of the residents. So then if we take that 75% of spending that's subject to guidelines, now by the way, the budgeting groups are no obligation to conform their budget to the guidelines, but there's a process here, and it begins with the issuing guidelines to them. Together with the spending subject to guidelines, there is spending not subject to guidelines, and I'm going to talk a bit more about some of those a little bit later. There's also Tier 1 capital, and there are revenue inputs coming from other sources, which we need to be mindful of. And one of the key variables in this whole process is what will the increase in the tax levy be for next year. So we kind of are really, it's kind of a backdoor way of getting to what that increase is in the tax rate. Even though we don't set the tax rate, we're very mindful of it. All right. So let's see. Slide 4. Yes. So I broke it down here into 7 important points, I think. One is that we need to be listening. We need to read and listen and understand the priorities and the changes that the town and the schools face as they deliver services to their constituents. We don't just look at the numbers, we look at the needs. 2 is that we also look at the community, and we model the income growth of the community. And this afternoon, Carlin Reed was kind enough to send me something about the COLA increase for state retirees, and it's capped at $395 per person. So that's the biggest cost of living increase that they can get, and that's part of our constituency. We also need to model the excess levy capacity. That's again, our headway to the maximum amount we can tax, and we need to also take a look at the services growth that. Yeah, I think the wish list is always unlimited, but there's always demands that are required through mandates and things of that sort. So then we look at the net change in the tax rate, and we see where this would all leave us. And we, quote unquote, strive, I like that word, to not burden taxpayers beyond what typical expectations of income growth can accommodate. This is one of those finance policies I have seen in other towns. It's a policy not to have an annual increase of taxes beyond the income growth. It's an awful hard thing to guarantee, but it's something sort of a goal, more aspirational. And the next one, point 5, we then deliver the guidelines to the town and the schools for their use in preparing the budgets. And we want to do it with clear communication, and we want to really clearly communicate the assumptions we're making as we go into it. And the whole process is a balanced approach. It's not a one-sided thing. So this slide captures the key metrics used last year. There are 2 income metrics and an inflation metric shown here. In the sort of the gold-colored box, the lowest one is the real personal income growth per capita. The orange box, the tallest of the 3, was the projected nominal income growth per capita, and then the blue was our preferred metric for inflation of the schools and town expenses. It's a very distinct subset of the CPI that it's weighted between 80% to the cost of labor, and which matches our expenditures as a town. As a committee, we voted on preliminary guideline of 2.44%. And then after hearing input from all of the bodies and the specific needs, we landed on the guidelines you see in the middle, 3.2, 2.6, and 2.85. Now, what you see at the bottom, I thought it'd be interesting to say, well, what did we accomplish with this? Where did we land? total spending actually grew by 5.14% last year, in this current fiscal year, and the resulting tax rate increase is 4%. So you might say against one of those trends, whereas this is improvement, where our tax rate rose less than our spending, but our spending is continuing to rise at that 5% rate, and our tax rate only rose 4% because of some temporary, I want to say one time, but they'll probably repeat. There's some temporary reserve releases that we can't count on. So I think it's safe to say that taxes would have grown by more than 5% this year, if not for those one-time releases. So our next thing, the main topic of this meeting is really to discuss these metrics and your suggestions for changes. I've put a couple of thoughts on this slide already, but I've left some space to add more ideas. I just want to cover what we have been using and why on the left-hand side. So inflation, the cost of services, we use the employment cost index. It's all listed there. Private wages and salaries, 80%, and the CPI for goods and services. Yes, please.
I just want to add that all of the data from the CBO is forward-looking, so it's all projections from the CBO. It's not backward-looking, and what we've done in the last two cycles is adjust it actually to coincide with exactly what the projections are for our fiscal year. So it's not calendar year based; it's actually based on our fiscal year.
Thank you, Lindsay. We also look at town revenues. What do we expect to be raising in revenues? And that comes from the CFO. We look at I skipped over one. Then the not subject to guideline spending, that also comes to us from the CFO, the health insurance, changes in debt service, et cetera. We look at the taxpayer's ability to pay. And again, that's a forward-looking metric using the Congressional Budget Office projections for real and nominal personal income growth. And of course, we are measuring that against the excess levy capacity, which those calculations come to us from the CFO. I want to go back to the previous slide just for a moment to say, what went the wrong way? Okay. I've always wondered, since I've been a member, why is it that we can set a guideline that's sub 3% and we end up with 5% increase in spending? So, and this is a good example of it. So I've spent some time going through the spending not subject to guidelines, and I just wanted to share what I've learned with everyone here. On the chart on the left shows sort of 5 major buckets of spending that are not subject to guidelines. One is group insurance, the employee insurance. That rose 14% last year. The next one is our retirement assessment and OPEB contribution. That one fell by 14% last year. We are putting away less money toward the retirement fund. Next is our Tier 1 capital. Tier 1 capital used to be subject to guidelines, and we took it out last year in order to sync the process between the town and the schools. That Tier 1 capital, taking it out, resulted in a 35% increase in Tier 1 capital in fiscal 26. Tier 2 debt service. Tier 2 is so for definitions, Tier 1 is capital that we spend cash for. We don't borrow. Tier 2 debts is borrowed money but not excluded debt. And
it's not, it's borrowed within the levy limit. It's debt that doesn't require a separate vote at town meeting and a separate vote at the ballot box in order to approve the additional borrowing.
Thank you, Lois. So our debt service cost, just the interest and principal payments, debt service cost for Tier 2 debt rose by 25% this year. And I don't recall any discussion about it. I don't think it came to the Finance Committee. Our Tier 3 debt service are things like the middle school debt, and that rose by 23%. But what's really interesting, the reason I put a box around the two, is if you add up the growth, just the growth in Tier 1 and Tier 2, they grew more than the debt service on the middle school grew.
They weren't subject to guidelines, but all the debt, these things were voted on at town meeting. Approved. They were all approved at town meeting. So just pointing that out.
Yes. Yes, fair enough. It's a good point.
The borrowing, the tier one is, to the extent it was included in the budget, was part of an approved budget. To the, since it was separated out, it was specifically voted on at town meeting. Lindsay's exactly correct. These are approved. It's,
They did
Uh,
go up though.
they absolutely did go up. And we should be thinking about how, since we get to comment on all these are the non-specifically budget financial articles that Finance Committee gets to hear presentations on, ask questions about, and make recommendations on. We should be very much aware of these figures going forward as we see what's coming to town meeting for approval in the next year.
Great point. Thank you. The chart on the right shows the annual increase in tier 1 plus tier 2 debt service. From 23 to 24, those costs grew 10%. From 24 to 25, they grew 6%. And from 25 to fiscal year 26, they grew by a third, 33%. This is really where Concord's debt problem lies and why. And so if not for those increases, our spending and our tax rate would have matched our guidelines. So we actually, I think, I wanted to flag this because I wanted to put it before the Finance Committee. Should we be giving this a little more scrutiny and perhaps in even creating a guideline for it? I feel as though we had tier 1 capital covered previously. Last year, we took it out of the guideline process, and the result was a 35% increase in it. Now, the town meeting approved it, yes. I don't, I'm just asking the Finance Committee, what's your sense of it? So if we go back now to the previous slide, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the metrics that we've been using, and I want to ask you whether you think we should consider adding anything to the mix. For example, our budgets for the schools don't have any metric that reflects the change of enrollment in the schools. So is that something we want to consider as a group here? Our metrics for the town don't include anything to do with capital. Is that something we want to try to model so that we have more control? And thirdly, we need to discuss the out-of-district placements. Last year was the first time we took those out of the school guidelines because we said it's hard for the schools to control. As part of our letters of request for the information, we're asking for a lot of data about those. But I'd like to hear from this group, anyone who has an opinion, to share. Okay. So I see Paul's hand raised. Oh, sorry. Carlin's been patiently waiting. Sorry.
I want to go back first to, I'm just going to use this mic here that's turned on. I want to go back first to a comment you made earlier that we would have had a tax hike would have been more than 5%, but for some one-time reductions. And I think when we're looking at spending increases, that's not coming.
It's fine. So go ahead.
What I'm trying to make is let's look at the spending increases, but let's also look at the expected tax impact. Now, oh, sorry. The tax impact was reduced because of what of the budgets that were actually created. So focus in addition to the spending, what's the impact on the tax rate?
So Carlin, I actually, if I said they were one-time reductions, that I misspoke. They were one-time revenues to the town. So, so they come in reported under local receipts and other, and there were two items that, while they may happen more than once, they're technically non-recurring. They're not something we want to bank on. One of them was our release for the middle school debt of $1 million, and the other was $1.6 million from a pension reserve that came into the budgeting process toward the that again, they're revenues, but they're not recurring per se. Yes, Paul. Can Paul speak?
I can speak. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, now we got you. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm all for looking for metrics and understanding the changing picture, but I do think we should be careful on assuming like 100% service elasticity, like this, meaning like the schools could change their makeup based on a single point in time enrollment. Like if we see a genuine trend that's forecasted for a long period of time, then I could see driving that. But I would hate to make an adjustment that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you know, there might be a dip in time that we then interpret that this is going to be a reason of contention between like our like issuance of guidelines to the schools, and then they fight with us, and then, you know, they don't actually look at their budgets, and then they choose to just draw a line in the sand. So I guess I'm sensitive to the idea of like looking at a metric and trying to understand a very complex picture with a point of data. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep, thank you.
I had one thought, Don, as we're looking at this, and that is in terms of the treatment of what's subject to guidelines and not subject to guidelines, and looking at the out-of-district placements decision we made last year. I wonder if we shouldn't be ourselves looking, or maybe encouraging the schools to look, and maybe encouraging the work group to look at other ways to manage those kinds of unpredictable expenses. And for example, reserve funds can be very helpful in a reserve fund that was created to smooth that curve, to buffer that, to protect yourself against the scenario that we've heard about from the schools, where there's a new family that moves into town and suddenly there's a couple of out-of-district placements that will be very expensive, and they couldn't have foreseen that. Are there other ways to help smooth that and manage that exposure other than just pulling them out of guidelines? So that was one thought that I had. And to Paul's point, I think that's an excellent point about not presuming the future from a single point in time. If we've declined the last year or two, it doesn't mean we'll be declining over the long term. But I think there are ways we can look at that. And I think we can look at that in a sophisticated way by understanding what are the implications of a decline in enrollment generally, what expenses are fixed costs that aren't affected by the number of students, what expenses are actually reduced when student population is reduced, and are there breaking points? Is there a point at which, well, if the population drops off by a certain percentage, classrooms get consolidated and you need less support personnel? I mean, whatever those factors are, if we get a little more granular like that, if we understand better what the schools are dealing with, I think we can make a more sophisticated judgment about it. And I think that's part of what Paul was saying, using a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. So.
Right. So I think the first question is, should we look at this at all? And but then beyond that, they're absolutely, I absolutely agree with everything you've both just said. And in fact, there are projections for the next 10 years of the student population in Concord, and as part of the letter, we're asking the schools to give us their estimate of the impact of additional multifamily housing, so that we can be very thoughtful about this process. And also, it's definitely not the marginal cost is very different from average cost when it comes to education, and there are definitely breakpoints, and there are ways to be mindful of it. Should the committee decide that, so I think that should the committee decide to vote tonight that we want to develop metric for school population, then I would be charged, I guess, with going back with Paul's work, with help, to come up with some proposals for how we would do it.
Actually, that's something I wanted to focus on. The metrics process and the guidelines process are separate. The metrics, that at least as we've done it in the past, the metrics don't necessarily dig into the specifics of the town and the school's spending, because we don't have that information yet. They don't have that information yet. That's all being developed now. So I think some of what you're talking about in terms of out of district placements and how we treat certain things as being in or out of guidelines, I wonder if that isn't our conversation about developing the preliminary guidelines. I think we have to think about the metrics process. Do we want to use the kind of process we used last year, where we created sort of a range within which we expected to work? And then we took that and we announced that and let people know for their planning purposes. And then we started refining our preliminary guidelines based on input from the schools. The way I always thought of it is that the metrics are a little bit top down, because they don't really draw on the specific practice, the specific needs of the, we don't ignore the needs of the budgeting entities, because we're looking at metrics that we think reflect the impact on the things that they actually need and do and plan for. But it's a little more of a top-down process happening early before we get a lot of input from the budgeting entities. And then the guidelines process is more bottom up, because that's when we actually get presentations and responses to information requests. So I don't want to muddy those two things. I think our job is to do metrics now and think about guidelines later. And
so I agree with you with one exception. I think so, and it's regarding the capital piece. So Tier 1 capital, just for those who are new members, we changed it last year so that Tier 1 capital was no longer part of the guideline process. It wasn't subject to guidelines. We decided to keep that, let that be separate as a warrant article and not subject to guidelines. And the reason we did that, and that was just for town Tier 1 capital, is because town Tier 1 capital was within the guidelines and school Tier 1 capital was outside of the guidelines. And one of the mandates we took on last year was to try to apply equal treatment across all of the budgeting entities. So we decided that was one way to apply equal treatment. And I think that's still a goal in general. But to respond specifically to Lois's request, I do think the discussion of whether or not to include Tier 1 and capital, or in Tier 2, I see is listed here, in the guidelines is pertinent to the metrics discussion, because I'm not sure if we're looking at the right metric, if we use last year's metrics, do they really help us with planning for Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital? I don't think they do. So that's why they're related, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was assuming that if we were going to consider inflation, we need to talk about an inflation metric. If we're going to consider enrollment, we need to develop a metric for that. And it needs to be a metric before it's a guideline input.
I mean, I can see.
So for enrollment impact, there are formulas for the cost of education, how that we can leverage in the same way that we're leveraging inputs from the division, the Bureau of Labor, et cetera. There are such things out there for towns, for planning, for expenses around education. Yeah, so it would be something that would take a lot of research and a lot of work to come up with something meaningful and reasonable, and something that would work in both directions, because enrollment may certainly rise at some point. And we have a hand rising from Suresh Bhatia. Go ahead, Suresh.
Yes, thank you, Don. Can you put up the slide back again? I have a quick question on that.
Is this
No,
the one you meant?
The one with the mat, it's not shared, screen sharing not happening. No, the next one. One with all the metrics that you listed, I can't, no, the share screen share is not on right now.
This one has the data sources on the left side,
Yeah,
the inflation data source.
yes, can you bring that on screen, share screen? How come? Okay, I see it now, sorry. I had the wrong input going on here. So my question is like, we just talked about the tier one metrics being up, equal between the town and the schools. So making it an equal fare for 50-50, on both sides. So the inflation, the fiscal 26 data shows we're taking 80% for private wages and 20% for, consumer price or index urban for goods and services. The 20% that applies to mostly to people who are retired, correct?
The 20% is meant to capture energy and other variable costs that are not labor, and
So-
the 80% is labor.
But the private wages and salary, the 80% which we are saying, the question is, how does that weigh into the town's demographics as to number of people who are working or who are retired or a fixed income? How do we, weigh for that? Or account for that, or, at least give some weightage to that?
The 80-20 is based on the actual town and school together. Their budgets are approximately 80% human capital, wages and salaries, and 20% goods and services. So the way that we were calculating projected inflation was a weighted metric that was 80% inflation on wages and salaries and 20% inflation on goods and services to reflect the actual budget for Concord.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Suresh, the second to last bullet point, ability to pay,
Yeah.
is the metric that's been used for the income side. And to your point, it's a pretty high level figure. It doesn't break out percentage of retirees, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
And importantly, it doesn't factor in, and I think this has been brought up as a question, so it's something for us to consider. It doesn't factor in investment income. So some folks might actually be a lot of their living expenses might be covered by investment income, but this particular metric is really looking at income growth that's non-investment income.
Got it.
I'm going to make a recommendation. I don't know how much time we have to create a new metric. So my recommendation is go ahead, Paul and Don, try and find a metric for the using the school enrollment, but use what we've been using for the last 2 years as a fallback, and make sure you use the updated data for the inputs.
Yeah, we're not going to vote on this tonight. What we wanted to do was solicit ideas from people and let people know what the process was. At the August meeting, Don and Paul will come back with actual proposals about that. They'll have pulled up the most up-to-date data. They'll have plugged it in. They're going to come back with proposals about what data sources to use, and they're going to show us what the numbers look like. So we'll have another bite at this in August. But the goal then is to make some decisions in August about what metrics are going to guide our internal process so that we can share that more broadly and we can let the budgeting entities know about it, and also so that we can let the Concord Carlisle Finance Committee know what direction we're headed in, because as we did last year, we're going to work cooperatively with them on the review and approval of guidelines we're going to let them know what we're doing and make them aware and share with them the budget presentations, invite them to attend the budget presentations done by the regional school district so that we can make it more efficient for the schools. They only have to do one set of presentations, and so that we are establishing communication with both sides of the regional school district. So
With that, I'm just wondering, does anyone have any suggestions you'd like to put on the table for how we can improve our metrics process? Okay. All right. Then I guess we could turn to the letters. So you should see in your packet also the draft letters to the schools and the town. And let's see, I think I need to change my screen sharing to a different document. Screen sharing. Screen? There it is. Okay. Now, over to that's what I'm doing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, I'm not sure.
You need to scroll down to
Why
page
is it
56.
share screen. Okay. So now you should see there should be, I guess the first letter in the packet is going to the Minuteman regional schools. Did anyone have any additions to that? This is really the same with just edits, the same as last year. Does anyone have anything you'd like to see added to the Minuteman letter? Hearing none, I'm going to move on to the schools. So this letter is addressed to both school committees, the CPS and the regional school district, and it has quite a few quite a bit more detail than prior years. And I'm wondering if anyone has any requests for additional information beyond what's shown here.
So look into your magic crystal ball there, Don. What do you think the school is going to have the most problem with this request? CPS and regional school. What's going to be the most difficult thing for them to comply with at this point?
I think you mean the hardest question to answer. You know, it by and large, it's all data, and I think it's data that they have. I don't think we're asking for anything that they don't have. They have projections of future enrollment, et cetera. At this point, they have a capital plan, which is nice. I think it's just going to take time to pull it all together and write it all down because it's a lot. But I don't think there's anything here that requires any original thinking. Do you have any?
This is, yeah, fun. The one I'm thinking about is in number 5, the Tier 2 and 3 capital program, long-term 5.2. Please provide your current view of capital needs in the 5 to 15-year time horizon. I don't know if they've got I know they started doing a capital plan, but I don't know if it extends out 15 years.
Fair point. And of course, if they don't, they'll say we don't know yet. Yeah.
And I just have one comment on 6.6. That one I might just be clear that you're asking for next year, what you want that you'd like that share of Concord versus Carlisle. Because that one was a bit of a surprise to us because we were for whatever reason, there was a misunderstanding. We thought it was supposed to be no change, but there was a change. So I think, and they should be able to project that pretty well. I mean, more or less. So I'd like to, be clear that you want their projection for next year.
I think that's fair. My recollection, though, is that they don't usually get those numbers until October 1st. And we are going to be asking for replies to this earlier than that. So I think that may be one of the items that they're going to respond to by saying, we can't answer yet. We don't have the information yet. And I think there are a few things here that we may get that response. So we need to be clear that we are willing to take. We understand that some responses will be delayed.
Maybe for where they can't answer the question right away, ask, can you provide a date when we should expect it?
Good point. So on item 6.4, I added to be finalized in October because that's specifically about the enrollment. And I know that, to your point, it won't be finalized until then. So it's already in the letter for them to finalize it for us in October. When it will. Yeah. Lois's point was that we should add to the introduction that if some information isn't available now, that they indicate when it will be available. Any other comments? Okay, moving on to the town's letter. Again, it's based on last year's letter, but it gets more specific and goes into some more information about. We know that capital planning, for example, will be a focus of a something that will be happening in parallel with the guidelines. So we're just asking for baseline data that may already be known. And question 9, because at least I don't know if others were also unaware, but I was surprised that there is a pension reserve. We're asking that the town tell us about all the reserves, every fund that is out there, so that we can include it in and that's not so much a matter of set for guidelines as it is for understanding and knowing that we accurately portray the financial condition in our FinCom report.
That's information that I think Ryan's department will be developing, not just for FinCom, but very importantly for the policy work group. So it's information that I think you will have access to through various channels. So I also just wanted to raise one other thing. Introductory paragraphs about the timing of when the information is going to come to us. The town, I know, is doing work in August to get input from the departments on capital, and the first look at the budgeting won't be completed until the very end of September. So one of the things, so some of the town responses may be deferred a little bit. And one of the things, some presentations in September on the data that's ready down, but maybe to put the town's budget presentation into October and see where the schools are. We'll get responses and be working with them collaboratively, I hope. So we'll have an idea of what times, but the goal will be to have pretty robust town or the school broken up as internal information development by enough information to vote on preliminary guidelines by the end of October.
Yeah.
So
Something else to consider in your request for sources of revenue. You're asking for all sources other than tax levy, the gift accounts. I think those are handled outside of guidelines, and yet they're revenues for the town to be used for specific purposes. I'd be interested in finding out the total amount and then some of the breakdowns, because recently we've had some developments on how some of those gift funds can be more than just $10,000 and can supplant some other expenses. So I'd be interested in the gift accounts.
I guess if there's nothing else, no further comment on the letters, we can move on to the next agenda item.
I want to be clear with everybody that these letters, with some revisions based on the conversations we've been having, are going out in the next couple of days. So if you have thoughts, they need to be communicated quickly, because these are going to be, in order to give the budgeting entities as much time as possible to respond, we really need to get these out, within sometime during that early in the first week of August, and August starts tomorrow. So. So the last item on the agenda is actually just to, again, we looked at these last time, the Finance Committee 226 goals and priorities. If anyone had any additional thoughts, things they want us to make sure we've accomplished by the time we look back at these in late March, early April of next year, I would appreciate hearing them. I don't know if we need a formal vote to approve these, if these are just our sort of internal wish list items, or if we want to formalize them with a vote. But I do want to make sure that I've captured whatever reactions people have, whatever additional input they want to have. So I just want to open it up for that. I don't see anything on the screen. Would anyone like to comment or make any additions? Does anyone feel strongly that we need a formal motion here? Arlen thinks we should have a motion. So can I have a motion to approve the Finance Committee 2026 goals and priorities?
This is Gerard here, by the motion to approve.
I move to approve the Finance Committee goals and priorities as distributed in the meeting packet.
I'll second that.
Second.
Carlin, could you take the roll?
Take the thing to do. All right. This is a motion to approve the Finance Committee 2026 goals and priorities as presented in the packet. Roll call. Suresh Bhatia.
Aye.
Sorry. Okay. Suresh,
Aye.
Peggy,
Yes,
Brian,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Gerard,
Yes.
Dawn. He votes yes. Lindsay. She votes yes also. I have the only microphone I have. Carlin, yes. Paul,
Yes.
Lois.
Yes.
Okay, that passed unanimously. Thank you.
So the very last item, so even with the glitch, we are going to end early. The very last item is the recap of action items, and I think they're pretty simple this time. The ones I captured are to get the dates for our meetings up on the town calendar and to get calendar invitations sent out to everyone, which we'll follow up on and get done well in advance of the next meeting. And the other thing we need to do is get those letters out. And Carlin will do the minutes. And I think that is kind of it. So would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I move to close the meeting.
Second.
Roll call vote on that.
I'll second that.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. See you in a month. Bye.
Thank you.